This is the WED Web Chat, Wednesday Web Chats, which we do on a weekly basis to discuss issues that sort of in our mind, uppermost in our mind, somewhere in the back of our minds, but they are issues nonetheless that we should want to talk about and bring experts into the discussion. Today's session is preparing leaders for a competitive future. We've had COVID come in. It's kicked a lot of things out of play and into play, and the competition's changed. We're up against something we can't see, but we also still have our regular forms of competition, and we've been going through challenging times leading up to even COVID. So today's session brings in people who are at the helm of different industries. In that space, they have to deal with competition, both in terms of business and now with COVID, and they've been affected to various degrees by it. So we've got Paul Harris, who's the Asia Pacific Regional Director of Rolls-Royce Motor Cars, and he brings 30 years of experience from within the BMW Group, holding significant roles including sales, marketing, and financial services in the UK and in continental Europe. And he leads the Rolls-Royce Asia Pacific from the Singapore office, covering the region outside of Greater China. Welcome, Paul.
Yeah.
We've also got Brian Riady, the Deputy CEO and Executive Director of OUE Limited. Brian was appointed to this position earlier this year, and he is the Executive Chairman and Group CEO in overseeing all business operations in the group. And he sets out and executes its strategic direction as well. He's presently a non-independent, non-executive director of OUE Commercial REIT Management, and he's a manager of OUE Commercial Real Estate Investment Trust. Welcome, Brian.
Hi.
We have Luna Bajracharya, who's a hotel manager of JW Marriott Singapore South Beach. Luna has been in the hospitality industry since 2006, worked her way through various managerial positions in Shangri-La Singapore, the Ritz-Carlton, Millennium Singapore, the Bulgari Resort in Bali before joining JW Marriott Singapore. In her current role, she oversees the day-to-day management of rooms, F&B, operations, and engineering, while ensuring a memorable experience for guests. Welcome, Luna. And making up the quartet of panelists, we've got Wladmir Silva, Chief Development Officer and Head of Consumer APAC at GraceBlue Partnership. Wladmir has more than 25 years experience in the executive search space, management consulting, leadership, and business management, and specializes in senior roles for consumer brands, digital organizations, and companies in the hospitality and travel sectors. Wladmir has worked globally in more than 40 countries with many international clients like Facebook, Grab, Miller, and Standard Chartered Bank. He's also a professional executive coach and currently pursuing a PhD in general management at the Singapore Management University. Wladmir, welcome everybody to today's session. I think it is going to be a lively one because all of you have a lot of working experience in preparing leaders for a competitive future. I just want to understand from each of you, how do you define leadership in your organization as businesses move into a digital space, more so now with COVID, you're going into Zoom, you're going into the digital arena much more. How have you had to redefine leadership within the organization? Let me start with you, Paul.
Well, I mean, I think that the circumstances changed and maybe the way we communicate has moved on significantly, but I think the core role of leadership, achieving more with the support and direction towards others, I think is still very, very valid. And I don't think that that really changes. The levels under which we operate, though, does, and I think that that's where the key changes occurred. So it's really one of communication and how we communicate, how we trust, and how we move forward from that particular point onwards in these very dynamic times that we're in. So I think what COVID enabled us all to do was to sort of step back a bit in a way and re-look at what we'd been doing and give ourselves an opportunity almost to reinvent ourselves. And I think it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, really. A positive that came out of the whole thing is it gave us a chance to sort of step off the hamster wheel and look around and breathe and think, how can I do things a bit differently, and how can I bring a team remotely with me rather than, you know, as I may have done in the past. So for me, I think the key is communication. I think that's where it's changed the most.
Okay, methods of communication, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, Luna, how about yourself?
I agree with that. For us, we might have less contact, physical contact, but in terms of connectivity, it is even more necessary. Everybody right now, it's an uncomfortable situation. So we as leader, I think reassuring ourselves as well as the team that we are always there for each other, and to be able to connect even more is crucial for us. And at the end of the day, the core values that all of us have as human beings, nothing has changed, right? We see in our guest as well, although we said that, okay, a lot of technicality have changed, that we have temperature checks and small things, but everybody is still craving for the same connection that all of us are looking forward for.
Okay. So it's essentially trying to convert the physical into the digital space without losing anything in the process. Yes. Okay. Brian, what's it been like for you? You're new to this leadership role to some extent in the larger group. How has that been like coming in with COVID hot on your heels?
Yeah, it's been an interesting experience. I think, as you pointed out, I'm new in this position and new in this role. And as we just turned the page on the previous decade and we look forward to the next 10 years, I think we started at the beginning of this year thinking about a 10-year plan, right? What do we want to achieve between now and 2030 in terms of all of our various business segments? But I think what's actually happened is that our 10-year plan that we formulated just 11 months ago, and the one that we see in the immediate horizon now, November looking into 2021 and even beyond that is very, very different. And so, I think that, leadership in kind of the current context, and particularly in this kind of age of COVID, is really about being nimble. It's about, being nimble and quick to pivot your strategies and your business models. I agree with what Paul said, is that because things are changing so rapidly and so quickly, communication is also extremely critical, because as you change your strategies, as you change your direction, as you make adjustments to your business plans, it's important that we align all of our various stakeholders, right? So including our employees, including our team members, right? But also including our shareholders, our various stakeholders in the company. And so I think, communication is something which is really, really critical in these times, to ensure that with the rapid pace of change, that everyone in the organization and all of the various stakeholders are kept apace with those changes.
Okay, cool. Vlad, how about yourself? In the recruitment space, it's quite different, right?
It is because I look at leadership much more from a client's perspective. So our clients' perspectives and the candidates that we present to companies. And I agree with what Paul said. And the core principles of leadership, they haven't changed. And they will not change. And communication, of course, became much more obvious in terms of being more agile. And people today, they want direct communication with their leaders. And that communication needs to be more often than the traditional once per year or twice per year communication from the leadership. And however, moving forward, I see a few traits that are important for leaders. And one of them is humility, and we're dealing with different generations today in the workspace. So we need to know that we don't know everything. So we need to be able to embrace humility. We need to be authentic, and but most important, especially in times that things are changing so fast, experience and skills, they're still important. But one very important thing that leaders need to develop, it's a new mindset to deal with the pace of changes. And it's embracing change, is embracing and how to adapt themselves and learning dexterity. So that's how I see leadership today. And that's the kind of conversations I have with my clients. And kind of.
Okay, great. That's a very good sum up of what you're looking for in leaders, Vlad. Based on what Vlad has just said, how have you, the rest of you in the panel, come to terms with that? Do you see that the next generation of leaders have those skills which Vlad just outlined? Do you see the potential for them to develop them, or do you see a challenge in that they're kind of into their own space and may want to do things in their own way, which may not jive with what Vlad just said? Paul, coming from a very old heritage brand, which is still regarded as a top brand in the world, I'm sure you, as a brand, you set very high standards for potential leaders. How do you ensure that there's also a coming together of the brand values with what's changing in society?
Yeah, I mean, we regularly review the brand, and the brand has almost been through should I describe it as quite a large, not evolution, but almost revolution in the last 5 years. So I think that along with that, that's very much driven by the people within a business, because a business, even if it makes product, is not a business until the people bring it alive. So I think that, it is about this working across many, many different, types, the young all the way, young apprentices right at the beginning who come into the factory and learn a skill, all the way through to the mature sort of like, senior managers and senior leaders. I think what is important really is this whole agility piece and the ability to be able to take something on board and realize it's not as we've looked at it before, and we need to think about new ways. And I think that Brian, I think you were referring to a sort of strategic plan that you worked to. I think at the moment we're lucky if we plan in a month about what's going to happen, because anything longer than that at the moment is such an uncertain world. And I think managing in volatility is probably the key. And remember, we work in a product line whereby whatever we make today will not arrive in Asia, for example, for another sort of 3 or 4 months. And there's a long material supply chain. There's a whole product development, area going on that's a 7-year backward, forwards, backwards window. So there are many, many developments that we need to keep our eyes on, and we just need to have a leadership group that has got the flexibility to deal with the now and to try and predict the future in a volatile way, which maybe is even more volatile than we've ever seen before. And it's moving at a pace it's almost impossible to keep up with, to be honest with you. I think you've just got to decide which is your direction and stick to it to a certain extent, but with a degree of flexibility built in. But if you keep moving around like a weather vane, I think you're going to get very, very confused and lost about which direction you're going to go in, as are your teams. And therefore, a leader at the moment needs to have a stoic view on a long-term ambition and try and steer those choppy waters towards that long-term view. It doesn't matter what storm comes at you, you can deal with it from the helm.
Yeah. Luna, you're in the midst of that kind of a storm now. How have you changed in terms of how the business is run and being a leader? How is your team reacting to all of these changes that are taking place?
You just ask, how do I see my leaders in the future? And I have to say, I'm super blessed. I'm very, very glad that we have very, very young team. And to think that things are moving so fast in the past 6 to 8 months, we are constantly reinventing ourselves. Like Paul had said as well, this is our time to reflect. The little bit of a circuit breaker time that we had off was a time for us to reflect back on all of our operational standards, everything that we did. And everything in luxury in the past, we would have never done it. For example, a fine dining restaurant will never imagine doing a delivery for a takeaway. We would not have even delivered to a room, and we would have snobbed up saying that, no, this is not what we do. And at the end, we survived with the takeaways and delivery, and on having from the top level chef to the restaurant staff reinvent themselves on every step of service. Still understanding the core values, once again, that we are here to deliver the best service for the guest and not compromising that, but reinventing in terms of the processes and how we conduct and how we communicate with the market turn out to be a success for us. Right now, we have a very strong presence with all of our restaurants in the takeaway and delivery platform. I mean, last year, I would have never allowed it. I would have never thought about it, right? So every step of the way, we are looking back and say, okay, what else could have we done? And a lot of great ideas that are in fact coming from these new upcoming leaders. And I think that's the best part about it, that we are not just holding the old values. For me, leadership, one of the key things is also important is transparency. The team needs to know exactly what is happening without the filter. We're not here to cut certain information and just share. I believe in absolute transparency. So whatever it is going on, every level needs to know, so that everybody needs to come together to make decisions. And decision-making platform has also, for me, changed quite a lot. Last time, we used to have a lot of hierarchical approval system. But with the new system, right now, the way we are going, decision-making has become really, really fast. We have to make decisions very fast. And so you need to give the empowerment to the team to come up with the ideas and try it out, risk it, right? We will see how it goes, works or not, trial it, rather than being fearful of failure. So risk-taking is very, very important for us right now.
So it's a kind of humility for you as well, right? As you said, in the past, you would not do the home delivery, the delivery at all, and now you do. So has humility resulted in more business for you? And is it something you will continue after things settle down? COVID's gone, you got a vaccine. Would you continue with the delivery, or would you revert to your old ways and say, no, yeah, we're back?
No, I think this is, we see it as a new market altogether, right? The outcome or the result has been so strong. So it is already in our budget for next year that, okay, this is something we're going to move forward with. Yes.
Paul, with a brand with such a heritage like Rolls-Royce, the quick changes that Luna was talking about, is that something that you take on board as well, or is yours a bit more of a measured, thought through, process-driven decision-making?
Yeah, ordinarily it would be. I mean, like we've just recently launched a new Ghost model line, and that for us is very much of a physical participation element, and the whole world got turned upside down. Firstly, the factory had to close for a period of time, which is just around the crucial sort of delivery element of it. Then we had a variety of things happen around the world. One, a logistics chain that was not operable or was running at 50% or less of its capacity. And then we had venues, for example, in a country like Korea that were owned by the government, where the government basically said, no, that venue's shut 5 days before we're due to do something. So, you got these whole variables you have to deal with all the time. What we were able to do very quickly, because we had the technology, was to be able to run effectively digital launches very, very sharply within our own office environments. And we were able to invite clients in. And I was quite surprised, actually, they were quite engaging. And we have a very, good infrastructure for client, shall we describe it as, commissioning experiences, whereby they get a chance to speak direct to a designer and have an better understanding of product and what the product can be for them. And we had many of those scenarios going on. So although they weren't physically there, couldn't see, smell, touch, etc., which is a very important element of the emotional drive in a luxury brand, the actual human element of it was still there. It was just done through screen to screen. Not quite the same and not ideal, but it worked. So I think that we adapted and we were able to do things, even in a very, very quintessential brand like ours. It's a long lead time brand. We were still able to move things forward quite quickly. But
you would still like to go back to the physical contact once everything is settled, right? I mean, this is a fallback. It's
very difficult holding up a lovely piece of leather and saying to somebody, look at this, touch it, feel it, smell it. You can't do that, without the interaction. So, okay, you can do it, but there are very, very rapid delivery mechanisms, and a customer can, at the same time as you're describing things like that, pick them up and work with them. But I think it's very much, a feeling of how you are around something or in something that's more important. And that's the thing that makes your ultimate decision. I'm sure it's the same in the property sector as well, and the same in the hotel business. At the end of the day, your marketeers do a fantastic job at the words, but it doesn't beat the actual physical touch point of the customer experience.
It's very experiential, isn't it? Yeah. So Brian, as a new leader, what does your generation want in a leader? As you were growing up, what sort of values did you see a leader having and should have?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can speak for my entire generation. I'll speak on my own behalf, but
Sure.
I do agree that one of the points I think, Vlad, that you made was authenticity, right? And I think my generation, we look at leaders who don't just talk, but also so-called walk the talk, right? I think that's very, very important, is that in leaders is that, we set the direction, but we also set the example, right? And the way that we conduct ourselves, the way that we treat stakeholders, the way that we treat employees, I think speaks volumes about our character, right? I think it's, you want to work in a place where you feel it's an inclusive environment, where you feel like, you work with a team that's fully aligned to a direction and to a vision. And so having, leadership that, so-called walks the talk, I think, and kind of exemplifies that authenticity, I think is quite important, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, I think for our organization, for OUE, we're a company that's been around for over 60 years. I think the property sector is also one that tends to be a little bit more of an old boys club, so to speak, right? So I think coming in, at a relatively kind of young age into a senior leadership position, I think one of the focuses for myself is, is this point about authenticity, is even though I am, so-called a leader and a boss in many respects, but at the end of the day, I'm also a human being, right? And if we can try to narrow the gaps in terms of, the hierarchy within the organization, and really just, create relationships with our employees, I think that goes a long way actually to earn the respect and the buy-in of our team members.
Okay. One of the things that a survey by IDC showed was that pre-COVID, about 19.6% of the workforce wanted to work from home. During COVID, it was 53%. But even after COVID, pre-COVID, it was 6%. So 6% wanted to work from home. During COVID, it was 53% were forced to work from home. And post-COVID, they said 30% will want to work from home. Now, how does that affect the effectiveness of the leader, having a team that doesn't want to work in an office and prefers to work from home, work remotely? Vlad, is that something that your clients maybe feel a bit challenged by? I mean, does that affect how you look for leaders as well?
I think that's one of the hottest debates that we see today, and with leadership and with HR. And it's how to manage a remotely diverse and workforce. I think going back to the first point that Paul raised, I think it's about communication. So that's the first point. So we need to change the way we communicate, and the leader communicates with their teams. That said, and going back to the previous question about the next generation of leaders, I think that they have an advantage because they are not afraid to fail. They are a generation that wants to try new things, and they are able to organize themselves in different ways, which is not purely hierarchical, but it's project-based. It's and there are different ways that they find to organize themselves. So when we look at the younger generation working from home or working remotely, whatever we want to call, or if they want to travel the world, it's not COVID that it's going to stop them from doing it. And what COVID has done is that it compressed within a few months what traditional corporations would have taken 5 to 10 years. And so the trend to work remotely has started with Generation Z and Generation Y. We just compressed that. So there is this big trend of working remotely. And I think, going back to what we said, it's about being authentic. It's about being agile. It's about having a different mindset. But it's about improving the ways that we communicate. And when I'm talking communication, I'm not talking about being on Zoom 24/7. that's also not the proper way to communicate, because we have our tasks to do as well, and we need our me time, our own time. So there is going to be a balance somewhere, and that corporations are struggling. Some are having a headway on it, and but that's going to happen. And I think it's a process that will not be reversed and in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. At this point, I'd just like to remind those in the audience to please ask, feel free to ask questions. You can key in your questions in the Q&A box, or you can send it through the chat. We've got one question from Sanjay, Dr. Sanjay Kutan is asking if pre-COVID the leader has poor connections or relationships with the team members, the ability to be an effective leader during the crisis period becomes difficult. How do leaders with poor bonds with their team pre-crisis enhance their leadership influence during a physically disconnected working environment? You've all, to some extent, had to experience that, so maybe some of your experiences during this period would be helpful. What was it like for you, Luna?
Oh, we had, I shouldn't say it, but we had a fantastic time. We had so many activities going on. You wouldn't believe it. Every day, every department, every section will come up with an activity online, and the whole hotel team would have joined. So we had example, like, of course, the exercise sessions, you know, then we had team, like, for example, in the hotel, we have housekeeping team who were teaching the entire hotel how to fold the laundry properly, how to do a bed properly. So every day we were connecting with each other, and we saw a side of our team member we never had known about it. You know, so to us, that was one of the period we really step back and look at ourselves, and it's just like, wow, I mean, I've worked with you for such a long time, but I didn't know your house looked like that, for example. Or when I was working, my daughter was constantly coming into meetings and saying hello to my entire team. There were different dynamics of it, but it really brought the entire team back together, and we were communicating much more, because it was much easier to just join into the meetings rather than running around from place to place. So everybody became very accessible to each other, and we loved that. You know, we didn't have a very long time, because once the hotel started to operate, unfortunately, my line is not the one that I could work from home. I have to be on site, and most of us are back here. But the time that we had during the circuit breaker, I think we really utilized it well, and to know each other and connect better.
So you're probably a bad example of a poor leader, right? Sounds like you managed to make the most of the experience and had everything going nicely and smoothly. Yeah. Very good. I'm not saying that either of you is a bad leader, but have you heard of experiences where people may have had challenging moments with dealing with a remote team? Brian, Paul, I'll come to you, Vlad, because I'm sure you've got a lot to add to this. Brian?
I can, again, only speak maybe from my own experience here, but, you know, I think that, as Luna said, I think there are lots of creative ways to stay connected and to stay engaged. Not sure about, you know, everyone else on the panel, but for myself, I think over the period of the last 6 to 8 months, I've gotten more gifts in food, in fruits, in steaks, in burgers, in, you know, Chinese food, whatever it is. I find that people have taken this opportunity to actually stay connected through food, actually. Not sure if that's been the experience of others, but, you know, I think there are a million ways to do it. You know, in today's you know, context, there are many ways to stay connected with your teams. And to still create that sense of, you know, so-called team amongst the organization. So, you know, I found that to be quite an interesting phenomenon that's happened recently.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, that's how our delivery worked very well as well. We had companies delivering to their employees, the gift bags, care packs, all kinds of cocktails, you name it. And that was a really, really nice thing as well, the beautiful notes that were sent to each other. And that helps, definitely. Everybody should do more and order from us as well.
Yes, why not? Huh? Paul?
I mean, the food and the way that you run a team was all very interesting. I think that the original question, though, was about if you've got a slightly more toxic employee at the time when you have as a leader, and how do you deal with that remotely? You know, because you sort of like suddenly be tripped from normal into the new normal of remote working. And I think that that's all about the importance a leader has in terms of identifying strengths and weaknesses in an individual team. So we ran an exercise about 18 months ago, which was, we call it strength-based leadership, where we looked at individual strengths. And we basically utilized that in a way whereby we made sure that every piece of work we gave them was really in a way it was playing to their strength rather than playing to their weakness. Because, you know, we all have weaknesses, everyone has them. But you're actually in a much better place if you play more regularly to your strengths. And so that was a very interesting piece of work that we did. But the toxic employee and how you deal with them, luckily I don't have any. I have had them in the past, but I think it's the importance of now and the management, you know, in the moment and taking the management position there and then. And this whole authentic thing, you know, if the company values are being seriously breached by an individual and it's affecting the team, I think it's incumbent very, very quickly that individual gets, particularly in sort of Zoom calls, they get shut down or get asked to sort of like, if you have got an issue, then please discuss it with me offline later, so it doesn't drag the whole team through the whole experience. And it's just learning those new skills that maybe you didn't have beforehand, and you need to have them even more importantly now and be even more sensitized to it. The other side of it is that, you know, I've seen leaders who've got an agenda to work to and they want to get through the agenda, and they, you know, it's item by item by item, and it's like 3 minutes to go, one more item to do. And at no point in the discussion did they ever ask how anyone was in the meeting. And I think that, you know, what we've learned is that it's very important that people offload what's going on in your life for the first 10 minutes of a meeting before you even start, and then you get into the agenda. If you just come together to have the meeting and get through the agenda, sometimes I find it very ineffective and almost inhumane. And therefore, I think that, you know, now as a leader, you've got to find this balance in the way that you run your organization and your teams.
Okay. And Vlad, what's your view on this?
It's very difficult to answer this question without putting my executive coaching hat on. And
Put it on, it's okay.
And recently I worked with a company, a global organization, medium size, about 500, 600 people globally. And surprisingly, the CEO is a young, mid-40s and executive. But he was that kind of executive that only connected to his group twice per year on that and semi-annual email. And that means that the company ran chaos because everyone thought that they were empowered without being empowered and run into different directions. So the first thing that I think when I hear this question is why that leader is considered a poor leader. So is it a leader or is it a boss? But that said, COVID might bring in some opportunities for that leader, which could be because it's an introverted leader and doesn't deal well on face-to-face. So COVID might bring in opportunities to have that influence remotely. But again, increasing the levels of communication. And leaders today, they need to find out what are their strengths and how they can play their strengths. And when they don't have certain strengths, is to identify people in their teams who can supply those strengths. And so it's not about lonely leadership anymore. It's about team leadership. It's about collaboration. These are very big words for this decade, is how you collaborate, how you create that synergy, and where the sum of the parts, it's more than the sum of the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So I think that's the main point of the question that Sanjay has asked. It's the reasons why and how can you use your strengths or the leader's strengths in this new reality that we're going through.
Can I just ask all of you, do you lead from the front or do you lead from the center? Paul?
Depends on the circumstance, is the honest answer. So if you've got a collaborative project you're all working on, then I think the central leadership is the way to do it. If you've got a problem or a crisis, let's say it's a customer issue, then, you know, sometimes you need to be a bit more dynamic and a bit more autocratic, and sometimes that's where you lead from the top. So I think you need to be flexible as a leader, and you know, one size doesn't fit. It depends on the circumstance. Yeah.
Luna? Luna, what do you think?
For in hospitality, when we say lead from the front, is a completely different destination or definition. For us, is we have to be in front of the guest, or lead by example kind of a thing. You know, for me, is in terms of the leadership, we need to be the key example. Every time anything happens, people are able to follow. Like earlier, probably Brian said, it is not on what do you do, how do you act, rather than what do you say. Agreeing to Paul as well, situations are changing, different way of making decisions depending upon the time. We need to know what is the balance and when to let go and when to bring things back.
How about you, Brian?
Yeah,
Lead from the front or center?
It's definitely a combination, and it's definitely dependent on the circumstance. I would just say that, you know, as we think about leading from the middle, I think what's important in my experience is, you know, really finding the right way to get others to step up and make decisions and take responsibility for major decisions, right? So, you know, I think that's, frankly, for us, that's a process, right? Is that we are trying to get team members in the middle to step up and to take ownership and to take decisions, and to be so-called taking leadership from the middle, so to speak, right? But it's not something that happens overnight. And so, again, as Paul said, I think depending on the situation, depending on the project, depending on the decision that needs to be taken, would determine ultimately how best for that leadership decision to be taken.
How about you, Vlad? What do you see in your process?
I think I agree with what Brian is saying, and I think one of the roles of the leader is to empower others and create new leaders within the organization. And now, there are moments that the leader needs to lead from the front, especially for those business critical and initiatives and things that are really critical and cannot fail. Someone needs to take the responsibility, and this responsibility ultimately is from the leader. But I think leader also needs to distinguish what is tactical and what is strategic, and you need to delegate the tactical and think much more from a strategic perspective, a bird's eye view, and a big challenge. Going back to one of the things that Paul said in the beginning of this conversation about the pace of changes and how it's becoming even difficult to keep up with it. I think one of the big roles of a leader today is to filter all the noise and that it's happening, new technologies, new trends, is to be able to filter the noise and bring in the team in the direction that the company needs to go. So it's filtering the noise and helping the team to also avoid that noise, so they have one goal, one objective. So it's again, and I'm just agreeing with what everyone said. It's about and being that example, but also empowering other people to take on the responsibility and to train them to become leaders.
Okay. How difficult is it to change the leadership mindset, though? Because if a leader is a founder of the company and believes very strongly that this is the way it should be done, and his character is sort of infused in the company, who's going to change that? I mean, should employees adapt to the leader, or should the leader adapt to the employees? Vlad?
I think it's much easier for the leader, for the individual to adapt to the company, to the team. We're talking one versus all. That said, and you still need to have that strategic view, that strategic direction, which should be given by the leader working with that team. And so I don't think it's unidirectional of who changes who, but it's to find how you work together, how you mix those strengths that everyone brings to the table, because ultimately that's how you form a team, is to finding strengths that are complementary to your own, and then moving in one direction. So it's not about adapting, it's about playing together. And I rather see it like that.
That's probably ideal, and that's assuming that the leader is open-minded and receptive to change, but some of them can be quite obstinate. So that's always a challenge, I would think.
That's
Paul,
the difference. That's the difference between leader and boss.
Yeah,
so the boss is righteous, always have that right mind, and nothing will change that. But that's just my opinion.
Paul, did you want to say something?
I think it's, well, I mean, basically, I agree with Vlad. I think it's very similar. Is the sort of approach. There is no right, no wrong way to do it. I think that it is easier for you to adapt than it is for a team, just purely on pure numbers alone. But I still think you need if this leader's setting the direction. There are, even if you just take navigation on a car, when you want to go from A to B, there's always 4 or 5 different routes. Now, the team may take you down those different routes. One may be scenic, one may be direct, one may be toll road, whatever it is. It sort of doesn't matter, as long as the leader always has that vision at the end of the day. And as long as we're playing to the strengths of the team to make it the most effective and efficient way to get from A to B, then it's fine to do that. And that will require adaptability on both sides, the leader and the team. And, and I think it's just a question of finding out what the key journey is and what the key destination is, and then adapting your team so that they're in their best position to perform to achieve that overall goal is the way that I see that sort of the role of leadership.
Okay. We're coming up on the time. I just wanted to take this question from Kristen. New social gaps have emerged in this pandemic. There has been some conversations around rethinking capitalism and rising expectations on companies to step up. Would taking an interest in uplifting the community bring value back to the organization and develop the leader that we want? Any thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I think, for our organization, I think, it has always been very important for us to look at how do we, we call it kind of community building. How do we build up the communities? Others may call it CSR. We don't measure it necessarily in kind of, the traditional methods of looking at CSR in terms of hours spent or dollars contributed. But within all of our developments, within each of our properties, we look at the communities even as being our tenants. In our hotels, we look at communities as being our guests, right? And of course, in the organization, in the company, we look at the community as being all of our stakeholders, our employees, our suppliers, our vendors, etc. Right? So, I think that we always do look at how do we create value for the communities that we operate in, and ultimately, I think that has an important role to play in terms of the branding of the company as as an organization that isn't just purely focused on profits, but that's also very much concerned about the well-being of the communities that we operate in, right? So I think that for us is always been an important kind of component to our company's direction and our company's vision.
Okay, I'm sure it's the same for Rolls-Royce and JW Marriott and all of your clients as well, that many of them want to contribute into the communities that they operate in, sort of give and take sort of system, right? Okay, we are coming up to time now, and I just want to ask a parting shot of all of you. I know some of you may not have children as yet, but will likely maybe have children down the line, but how would you prepare your children for the road ahead in becoming leaders? Paul, let's start with you.
Well, I have 2, just for the record. I I think I would say to them, first and foremost, they haven't got to be a leader. That's the first thing. They don't have to be a leader. So if they choose to be a leader, that's up to them, but they've got to lead themselves well. And I think that leading themselves with humility, with fun, with care, and to be respectful for everyone around you, I think is probably what I would like them to be. And if that takes them into a direction that means that they're going to become leaders, then as long as they treat others as they want to be treated themselves, I think that that's probably a good way to leave your children in the way that they need to be a leader.
A natural progression into leadership. If it so happens, it happens. Yeah?
Correct, yeah.
Luna?
Well, I have a daughter. So for me, as a female leader, I would always want to have this value with my girl that don't let anybody tell you that what you can't do. You know, always believe in what you are and stand for it. I have never hold my thoughts, never second guess myself, and I would want to see anybody, not just my child, any leaders, especially women, to believe in themselves and stand there.
Cool. Brian, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I fall in the camp of not having children yet, as you know, just recently married, but I hope to have children one day. You know, I think I was very fortunate and very blessed to have parents that I think have given me every opportunity in life. And that includes the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. So in fact, before joining OUE earlier this year, you know, my father gave me the opportunity to start a business in Indonesia about 6 years ago. And, you know, to really start kind of from scratch, from kind of ground zero, I think that experience of being able to build something from scratch is one that teaches you kind of a very, very valuable lesson that you know, can't get anywhere else. You can't get it in school. You can't get it through instruction. It has to be through experience. And so, you know, I think my parents gave me that opportunity to succeed, but they also gave me that opportunity to fail, and that opportunity to be kind of my own so-called, you know, had the opportunity to create my own path, right? So I think it's somewhat in line with what Paul said is, you know, if the natural path leads you down into that kind of role of leadership, then that's fantastic. But ultimately, being given the opportunity to kind of pursue your own path, your own route, I think is something that I would like to give to my children.
Okay, great. How about you, Vlad?
And I play in the same team as Brian, so I also don't have, we don't have kids, and I do have 2 nephews and 1 niece, unfortunately too far away back in Brazil. But I think that everyone has their own path, and I can really draw from my experience, and as Brian said, from the opportunities that my parents gave to me, and I was very fortunate to live in 4 different continents, and as I was growing up, and not because my parents, they basically lived in Brazil their whole life, but I also had the opportunity to work in 40 different countries. And if one day I come to have kids, one thing that I would like them to do is to go out and travel the world. Travel the world not as a tourist, but to really understand people, because I think that in the end of the day, leadership comes down to people, or how do you deal with people, how you connect with people. And in today's world, as we become more and more globalized, to understand about diversity, to understand about inclusion, to understand about differences, I think it's crucial to succeed as a leader in the future. So that's what I would like to see in my future kids, is that they have that opportunity to travel the world and ingrain themselves in local cultures, to understand how people deal with different things, how people have different points of view. And that doesn't mean that they are wrong, they are just different points of view. So that's what I would like them to see.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, all of you, for you know, sharing your experiences and your thoughts. Paul, Luna, Brian, Wladmir. I think you all make wonderful role models as leaders, and any employee has should be thankful that they've got somebody like you leading the way. A lot of valuable insights, and I think this will be useful for anybody taking up a role as a leader or considering a role as a leader to bear in mind as we get out of COVID. And I hope at some point we too can get a chance to catch up and meet up and have a face-to-face connection rather than a virtual session like this. But thanks again for your time and for sharing your lunch with us. A lot of food for thought. Thank you very much.